Hello everyone, this is Juan Freire, and in this presentation I want to spend a few words talking about the role of contact planning in the DTN flow, Delay-Tolerant Networking data flow, and congestion control. And this is a talk that was presented in the Space-Terrestrial Networking workshop within the IEEE SMACIT in 2019. So a little bit of background of flow control and congestion control, which are two concepts that are often confused and mixed. And it should be clear that from the traditional internet perspective, flow control and congestion control are two different things. On the one hand, flow control is the problem of keeping the receiver safe in terms of not providing the receiver too much data or more data than what the receiver can actually decode, receive, and process. So in the end, it's the control of the traffic between the sender and receiver directly, and the overall objective is to prevent the receiver from being overwhelmed with data. And this is particularly focused on slow receivers. Slow meaning receivers that basically process or can receive data at slower rates than what the network operates or what the transmitter can actually send. So flow control is more on the sender and receiver side. Congestion control is a similar but a different problem. Congestion control is about the problem of the traffic that is placed in the network, in between the sender and the receiver. And the idea of the congestion control is to prevent the network from getting congested. So the idea is to keep the network operating in such a way that there is a maximum amount of data that is flowing in the network, and the network does not start to drop packets or to delay packets. So the overall idea of congestion control is to adapt the data flow or the traffic to a network that might have limited buffers, which is the real case, that can have traffic from other sources also flowing through the network, or can even have slow links, right? So in the end, the congestion control is much more related to the routing problem, in a sense that the selection of which hubs or which links are used in a given network to get the data to the destination are chosen. So if in this networking or this route path that is chosen, there are some links that are slow, then the congestion control problem has the objective of adapting the transmitter data rate to the maximum link capacity that is in the path toward the destination, right? And this capacity also gets affected by the traffic from other flows flowing in the network. So if some of the network of some of the links on the path actually shares capacity with others, then this is also seen from the transmitter side or the receiver side as a bottleneck or as a maximum capacity that the end-to-end connection has to sustain. So this is the overall approach from flow control and congestion control in traditional internet networks. So TCP or Transfer Control Protocol is the most well-known protocol to cope with both effects at the same time. TCP relies strongly on end-to-end connection, so the receiver and the sender or the transmitter actively participate on the process. And interestingly, TCP does not assume any kind of support whatsoever on the intermediate network to do this. So on the flow control side, the receiver advertises to the transmitter, which is the spare buffer or the room to receive more data that it has on its local node. And this is via a receiver window parameter. And the sender is able to receive this data, this information, and limit the unacknowledged segment that is sent to the receiver. So the sender is constantly aware of what's the capacity of the local buffer of the receiver, and therefore it ensures that it's never more data on the way to the receiver than the receiver window, basically. And this is handled via the unacknowledged packets or segments that are flying on the network. So this is quite simple. Receiver advertises, the transmitter knows this information and reacts accordingly and throttles its data rate to compensate and to ensure that the receiver has the same has always enough room to receive the data that is flowing in the network to him. Congestion control is a little bit more difficult because, as I mentioned, this TCP does not assume that the intermediate networks elements actually helps the protocol to control the congestion. So TCP has to somehow infer which is the congestion of the network at all moments. And there are basically two ways to infer this. One of them is the loss of the data that is flowing in the network. So when the network becomes congested, all the buffers of the intermediate routers or the intermediate nodes start to get filled. So they start to become occupied, and buffers are not infinite. So there is a moment or a point in this congestion process where the buffers get filled, completely filled, and as new data arrive, this buffer has to drop data or delete the data that is not fitting any longer in the memory of the router. And this is seen from the transmitter and receiver side as a packet drop, as a loss of data. And TCP can actually measure this loss of data just by an ACK timeout. So when ACK are not arriving as expected, then TCP guesses that there is a congestion problem, and therefore it can throttle down the data, the transmitter, and therefore adapt the data rate to the network capacity. Another effect of congestion is the delay. So when the congestion process starts and the routers buffers start to get filled with data, the effects can also be measured from a delay perspective, because when more data is stored in the buffers, there is a higher delay perceived at the receiver because the data lives more time in the network, and therefore the end-to-end latency is also increased. So TCP also continuously measures delay or round-trip time between the transmitter and the sender, and adapts the congestion window based on this delay, parameter. And this way, TCP basically mixes all this recipe together and is able to control both flow and congestion control processes within a single protocol. But still, congestion control and flow control is quite controversial nowadays. TCP exists for many years already, from around, I believe that before the 80s, and many research has been done, and still is subject of controversy in many academic places. One of the things that is continuously discussed in the academy is that actually one of the issues of TCP is that it measures the effect indirectly, in the sense that the TCP is not really measuring the congestion itself, but it's measuring the consequences of congestion, which is what we mentioned, like the delay and the data loss. So this indirect estimation actually does not ensure that any of this delay or the packet drop effect can be provoked by any other cause than congestion. So this indirect estimation is quite an issue, and actually there are some other alternatives to this, such as BBR, which is one of the variable bit rates. So it's one of the latest enhancements of TCP by Google, which actually they are starting to prove the network, and in order to determine these parameters directly instead of doing that indirectly. Obviously, the trade-off of proving the network, just they save a few milliseconds of time just to test how the network is operating, and then the data sessions come back again. There is a small overhead of time that is lost because of this proving. But still, this is matter of a different talk. TCP flows ensure fairness between them. So if I have many TCP flows sharing a given link or a given path or a given router, the different Talloy, Reno, and the different versions of TCP ensures they will share the data or the capacity of the link evenly between them. However, this does not ensure that there might be other type of flows present that actually impairs TCP flows, such as UDP or other type of traffic. TCP does not rely on network feedback, as I mentioned. TCP only relies on sender and receiver. So network feedback can be used, and there are many proposals for this, but in the end, it basically depends on the end user. Because their transmitter needs to properly react to any signal from the network. And this is one of the main reasons of why network feedback is not really used in TCP flow control. And one of the most interesting topics is that actually layer models like OSI models or TCP/IP models actually decouples flow and congestion control from the routing part, from the networking layer. So this is flow and congestion control are typically on layer 4, and routing is typically a layer 3 issue. And they are seen and studied in general in most universities and engineering degrees. They're studied separately, like different problems to solve. And this is not necessarily true, as actually the routing decisions plays a key role in which is the maximum capacity that any path actually has. It's not just a matter of getting the data very fast to the destination, but also ensuring that the upper layers, in this case TCP for instance, actually has as much capacity as possible to be used, and therefore the less probability of getting congested. So they are interlinked. They are definitely interlinked, and internet currently has them quite separate. So the routing part just gets the route, and on top of that route you get the TCP flow running on top of that, and TCP has no inference or has no, let's say, call on whatsoever on what is the route that is chosen underneath for this service. So this is something that will change a little bit in delay-tolerant networking. So what happened with delay-tolerant networks? Delay-tolerant networks are kind of a generalization from the internet, in the sense that now links can have arbitrarily long delays. So typical internet connection, we're talking about a few hundred milliseconds in the very worst case. But with DTN, we're actually maybe talking about seconds, minutes, or even hours of propagation time in a given medium. And this especially comes from application from deep space and space applications in general. Also, DTNs are characterized by frequent disruptions. This is also something that's not present on internet. So we are used to connect to Wi-Fi or Ethernet or these type of protocols that are continuously connected, and a disruption is typically seen as an error case that the network has to react upon and take measures in order to find a secondary path to the destination. Otherwise, the network is considered partitioned or broken. But in DTN, disruptions is the rule and not the exception. So long delays and disruption are the backbone of the delay-tolerant network. And in the DTN network model, links now become contacts, and contacts has a start time and end time. So eventually, nodes has a sporadic connection opportunities with neighbors, and these connections are modeled in such a way that they will end eventually, and they will start again in some other moment. So in this type of model or network, which are nodes or communicate with each other on an episodic manner, the way of flowing data in this type of network is known as store, carry, and forward. This is in contrast with what is studied for traditional network as store and forward, where just a switch or a router receives data on one of the interface and instantly transmits the data out of the other. This instantly word is not longer present in DTN, as nodes are actually carrying data now. So this means that once the data comes through one interface, data can live some time within that node until a contact with the next hop neighbor becomes available. So data can be on two places in DTN. Data can be either in transit, flying in one contact from one node to the other. If it's a contact, let's say for instance, from the Earth to Mars, there is an average of 12 minutes delay that the data might be flowing in space, traveling at the speed of light from our planet to Mars. And so data can be definitely in space. And otherwise, they can actually be stored in a local memory of any intermediate node, waiting for a subsequent contact to appear. So data can also live in a storage unit of any of the nodes of a DTN. What is more interesting is that not only data actually can live in transit or in storage, but also the feedback that we get from a potential receiver in the other end also lives in transit and also lives in storage. So you can start to imagine actually how all these principles of flow control and congestion control in TCP are actually very difficult to imagine in a delay-tolerant network, because the TCP, as we mentioned, has to react continuously to round-trip time delays or packet loss, and this reaction is based on an instantaneous feedback received from the receiver, right? So so you can see that if we try to think of TCP, of adapting TCP to a delay-tolerant network, then we can quickly see that it's become problematic, as these feedback messages might not arrive soon enough for the protocol to take an accurate decision on what to do with the data rate at which it is transmitting. Moreover, now that we have DTNs, which is a highly partitioned network, there is no longer like an end-to-end connectivity, and therefore there is no longer an end-to-end connectivity. Every node in the path or any intermediate node can actually be seen as a receiver itself, and therefore the overall concepts of flow control and congestion control, which are crystal clear differently in internet, they become quite a bit fuzzy in DTNs, because you have the both effects combined on a hop by hop basis. So you will see that there are many works on congestion control on DTN that has a lot to do with flow control and vice versa. So in my opinion, it shouldn't be like a strong determinism on whether we talk about flow control or congestion control in DTN. In general, from previous work, you can see that there are some works on opportunistic DTNs. These are DTNs which the appearance of new contacts or new neighbors is actually unpredictable. So there are some studies on how to use the feedback, which is a delayed feedback. It's not an instantaneous feedback, but still a feedback and still a valuable information that we can use. So there are some opportunists, some previous work trying to leverage all this information in the best manner, in the best way. But still, it's quite an imperfect approach, because you never know when these feedback are going to finally arrive. And there are many works on opportunistic DTN, deciding which data to drop from a given buffer, which is overrun or overfilled. This is typically, if you look for congestion control on DTN, most of the works that you will find has to do with this problem. So we have a local memory, a local storage that will have data in transit temporarily stored in my local buffer, and so the question is, to which data should I drop? Should I drop the old one, the new one? And there are different approaches to define and answer this question depending on the information that is available and so on. So this is when you have to look for congestion control in ETN, you will typically find these two flavors. What I would like to state and argue quite strongly is that because of the lack of end-to-end connectivity that we had with TCP at the beginning of the talk, a delay-tolerant network, the flow and congestion control cannot be decoupled from routing anymore. So as I mentioned, each network node acts as a receiver, and therefore that receiver actually has to decide whether if they are going to store its data or is going to forward that data to a future contact and so on. And that forwarding process is a routing process. And this assumption on that a network layer actually defines the route, and on top of that route they have a continuous end-to-end that can actually automatically coordinate and find which is the optimal data rate that can be used in that channel is no longer possible. So in DTN, routing is actually the way of tackling congestion or flow problems. And this is a very simple case of how actually delay-tolerant networks congestion looks like. So this is what's called like a time evolving representation of a DTN. So the x-axis is basically the time evolution from left to right. And for each k, in this case, which is each state, there is a connectivity pattern that can be used to represent the connectivity throughout that state. So each k is kind of a time interval where the network behaves as the graph is defined. So for instance, in K1 we have no connections. This means that neither node 1 or 2 or 3 can talk to each other. Then at moment K2 you see that node 1 can talk to node 2, and then on a third moment on K3 node 2 can talk to node 3, and then on moment 4 on K4 node 1 can talk to node 3 at the end. And in this example we have two different flows. So on the left one we have node 1 that has 10 traffic units. This is TF that is destined from node 1 to 3, and a routing element in this DTN actually decides that the best way of getting to the destination is through node 2, in this case at moment 2, at K2. So this node decides to send these 10 units of data to node 2, and then node 2 also executes kind of a routing process to determine, okay, where to forward this data to, because I am not the final destination of this data, and node 2 determines that the next hop is a connection with node 3 directly, and it happens at K3. So you can see that this is a pure routing decision that's happening here. What's happened is that K3, or the third stage of connectivity, can only transfer 5 units of traffic because of the link data rate or because of the duration of that contact. Node 2 can only send 5 units of traffic to node 3. However, node 2 had received 10 units of traffic from node 1. So this is a congestion case where node 2 has to deal with an extra volume of data of 5 units and has no other contacts to use in order to send this to node 3, which is the final destination. And this is because of a routing decision that node 1 took in the first place, who decided to send the 10 units of data to node 2, right? And so this is very clear now that a routing decision has immediate consequences in the congestion case, in this scenario. So for example, let's see on the one on the right, where a different routing decision can actually lead to a non-congested case. So if node 1 actually decides to send only 5 units of traffic to node 2, then it can use the final contact at state 4 to send the remaining 5 units of data to node 3 directly. Okay, so if the routing is well thought, then a congestion problem in this case can actually be solved. So and this particular bottleneck that we have between node 2 and 3 at moment 3 can actually represent different real life cases. One of them can be as a flow control, where node 3 is a slow receiver that during the state 3 or during gate 3, it's only able to receive 5 units of data and no more than that, right? Another case is that node 3 actually has a small buffer that can only receive 5 units of data at a time, and therefore it becomes congested after that. Another possibility is also that the link from node 2 to 3 has a slower data rate, and therefore, or a short contact. So, and this actually forbids to send more than 5 volume of units of data. So we can see here that this is a congestion case that can be solved or tackled by having a smart route decision. Let's take a look at but this is a very similar case. And now we are removing this bottleneck from node 2 to 3 in the sense that this contact actually can actually take now 10 units of data. So we will not have any longer any congestion case even on the left route flow. However, what we do have here is that node 2 also has local traffic to deliver to node 3. And we end up again in a congestion case provoked not by a slow receiver, not by a small buffer in node 3, and not by a small contact or a slow contact between 2 or 3, but because node 2 or another node other than node 1 actually has data to be sent to node 3 as well. The issue here is that node 1 has no way to know that node 2 actually has data to be also transferred to node 3. So the routing decision in node 1 is actually, hey, send this data to node 2 at moment 2, at K2, and then node 2 will have a 10 volume capacity to use to deliver to node 3 the data that I'm sending to him. So node 1 decides to do this at moment 2, K2 forwards the data to node 2, and then at moment 3 we have a congestion case because node 2 can send only 10 units of data to node 3, and it has actually 20 units of data to deliver because it's 10 units from the node 1 and 10 units from node 2. There are 20 in total. And this can actually be solved, as we can see on the right part. So if the routing decision is smart enough, then node 1 can actually not send its 10 units of data to node 3 to node 2. Instead, just send this data directly in the final contact at moment 4. So this is the other possibility of congestion, which is provoked not by a memory or a capacity limitation in a contact or in a memory, but because of the presence of other traffic in the network. So this is another case of congestion where still routing plays a crucial role on what's happening in the end. So to get into a little bit more specifics on space-terrestrial networks. So space-terrestrial networks are a specific type of DTNs. So DTNs, in general, as we mentioned, they have contacts, sporadic connectivity between nodes, and arbitrary delay in the links between the nodes. But but these DTN nodes can actually be opportunistic, can be social networks, or can be vehicle networks or drone networks. And there is a particular family of DTN which is space-terrestrial networks. And in space STN or space-terrestrial networks, we have two main properties, which is basically drives them quite different from the other DTNs. And one of them is that we have a very good idea of what are the node properties, what are the different uh, uh, let's say buffer sizes of each of these nodes, what is the communication subsystem characteristics, so you know what type of antenna they have, what are the distance they can actually communicate at, what is the data rate they can get, and you have typically all this information available in order to take decisions on routing and eventually and also on congestion. So you have all this information at hand for making good choices. And furthermore, most important than this is that the orbital dynamics kind of play in our favor because all the movements of spacecraft, satellites, and deep space probe are actually highly deterministic, and there are very accurate mathematical models that can determine where an object in space is going to be in the future, and therefore combined with spacecraft platform parameters or information, you can actually easily determine which is a start and an end contact time for all the contacts in the future for this type of network. Obviously, the farther away in the future that you go, the less accurate these predictions tend to be, but still is quite reasonable to make predictions in the order of days or weeks. And so, this means that nodes in the network can actually um, use this information and profit from this information in order to take efficient decisions on where to forward data and therefore on how to avoid congestion problems such as the one we have seen in the previous slides. So what happens when we combine spacecraft platforms and orbital dynamics information? We can get one of the objects that's called contact plan. Contact plan is which is the schedule of communication that's going to happen in a given time interval starting from now into the future. And this contact plan dataset can actually be used by contact graph routing, which is a very popular routing algorithm that translates these contact plans to what's called a contact graph. And you can use Dijkstra searches and other algorithms to determine which is the next contact, the best next contacts in order to optimize a given metric, such as delivery delay or other metrics. And CGR can actually be trickled or can be modified or adapted in order to have a full awareness on the path that the data is going to follow from the transmitter node to the destination, and therefore become completely aware of which is the maximum volume of data that can be transmitted through a path in order to get to a destination without a congestion scenario. And this LPA or local path aware CGR actually solves the problem of a slowed receiver, because you know which is the speed at which any receiver can get data to small buffers at the intermediate nodes or at end nodes. And also you can actually be aware of what is the capacity of all the links, and therefore you can ensure that your transmission will not be higher or in terms of data rate or in terms of data volume than this maximal parameters that have the network has at any given moment. But let me add that there is a third element that is actually quite available in space-terrestrial networks and is quite generally overlooked. And this is the mission control aspect. And this type of space networks are typically highly centralized, and they are typically materializing a particular mission or a science mission or even a communication relay mission, but still they have quite a clear objective on what the mission is going to do. And this actually means that not only the orbital dynamics and the spacecraft platforms are highly deterministic, but also what the mission is going to be is also is quite deterministic as well in many cases. Not all, but in many cases. And this means that actually the payload data, let's say if it is an observation mission, therefore you can know in advance when you're going to take an image of the ground or whatsoever, and how much is going to occupy in memory, and when that image is going to be taken. So you actually can also include all this information um, as a mission control information set. And also you can also know in advance when telemetry is going to be sent, at which rate, at which volume, or which telecommands are typically going to be sent as well. So this is also some other information which is related to traffic specifically, that you can also take into advantage for routing and avoiding congestions in space-terrestrial networks. So combining all the three elements of STN, uh, one can think on a full traffic control approach, where all routes and all paths that the data is going to follow in the network is basically calculated on ground and then populated to nodes so they can actually execute the forwarding based on this very tight and strict control from ground. And this approach not only solves the issue of slow receivers, small buffer, and stall links, but also the issue of sharing the resources with other traffic, because a centralized decision is taken on ground, and therefore you can coordinate which traffic flow is going to use which resource in the space at any given moment. So this is a good solution as it basically solves any of the problem. And this is interestingly a solution that's quite appealing for industry that are thinking and implementing these space-terrestrial networks. And the reason is very simple, because you have a tight control on ground. You have you know exactly what's going to happen, and therefore you can facilitate debugging of this. This is technology that's still in maturing state, and therefore um, you need to debug. You need to understand what happened if the packet didn't arrive. Then you need to troubleshoot, and the best way of troubleshooting this is to have all the information on ground and make a good assessment of what happened. So it's highly likely, this is my opinion anyway, that the first steps in routing and space-terrestrial networks and congestion issues are going to be solved with a full traffic control approach. Um, the main drawback of traffic control approach, this full traffic control approach, is that you have no error margin. So if you have a data that's generated outside the what you have planned, let's say for instance alarms of let's say observations that are triggered by missions that are observing fires or these type of things that you cannot predict. You just react to the information or react to the environment. This is data that you cannot really predict, and therefore full traffic control might not be the best approach for this type of missions. So there is like an intermediate approach that can be taken, and this is what's called partial traffic control. And in partial traffic control, we are kind of in the middle between like CGR, where assumes nothing about traffic, and full traffic control, where we assume everything, and that we assume that everything is under our control. So we step a little bit in the middle of this and said we can book resources on ground for the different flows, and populate the different nodes with node specific contact plan. So there is no longer a global contact plan for all nodes in the network, but now we have one contact plan which is specific for each node in the network. So each node basically can have a local view of what's the capacity of the network that he can use and no other can. So it's like a pre-booked capacity resource for that specific node that can be seen. So it's like a partition in the network capacity somehow on a per node basis. And this can actually be taken, the decision can be taken on ground, but still the final traffic forwarding decision is taken on a per node basis. And if the node basically has a higher priority traffic to transfer, then it will use this capacity, and this is less controlled than the previous slide, and more controlled than a plain CGR that just don't care. It has no inference on what traffic is going to look like. And we will call this full path awareness based on a global view as GPA, of global path aware. And it has the following property. So we have like a centralized intelligence that can not only predict topology but also use all this suspected traffic information and derive and calculate and partition the overall capacity of the network in such a way that each node 1, 2, and 4 in this case can see in their local contact plan, which is the network capacity that they can use to transfer the data coming from them. And this eventually needs of source routing. So to make this happen, so the transmitter node calculate the route based on the local contact plan and then imprint the data of the route calculated in the header of the packet or the bundle when using bundle protocol. And the other nodes in the network will need to respect this decision from the original node and can only validate, they should be able to validate the path and so on, but will not be consuming the capacity that was assigned to to the to the intermediate nodes in a different contact plan. What is interesting from this partition approach is that you don't really need to fit the capacity exactly to what the expected traffic volume is going to be from that node. But you can basically add margins, so you can configure safe margins and say 20-30% of safe margin is for the type of traffic and so on. And in this way you can book resource in advance per node, and in this way you basically avoid congestion issues because everything is controlled and the flows basically will never compete with each other. I will briefly go through a case study, but I will leave a reference in the end if someone wants to take a look in more detail. This is an example topology which basically have 4 satellites with intermittent connection between them, and we have a sporadic connectivity with ground station. We have 4 ground station passes here, and the 4 nodes N1 to 4 actually wants to transmit data to the ground station. So we can see in this result from what's the effect of all the strategies that we have mentioned. So we have plain CGR, we have we have the local path aware, which is the CGR with the let's say capacity awareness of all the paths to the destination, and then we have a global path aware, which is the full the partial knowledge and the partial control of traffic. And there is a 4th element also here that we have not mentioned, which is like an enhanced version of GBA that has a specific tailoring to better fit control graph routing when using this in the different nodes. And what we can see from this plot is that local path aware and global path aware drastically outperforms plain CGR in terms of congestion and delivery ratio, right? Because this basically is enabling to reduce congestion and therefore is allowing the same network with the same traffic properties to deliver more data to the destination. And we will see that actually the improvement from it is quite clear from CGR to local path aware, and with the global awareness coming to play, this delivery ratio is increased even more. Another way of visualizing this is what is the effort or the retransmission effort that these routing solutions actually generate in a different node. And a way of measuring this transmission effort is how much time or seconds per packet were wasted in transmission time throughout the evaluated network. And we can see here that again CGR is the most expensive in terms of effort, because there might be a lot of traffic and data bouncing back and forth with many transmission, and this effort is drastically reduced for CGR, for LPA, and then for GPA. And now we see that extended GPA makes some specific tailorings I will discuss in a separate talk, or I will happily provide reference to the paper where we discuss this. Has actually even a dramatically improved effort in order to deliver this traffic to the destination. And this eventually maps directly to the delivery time. And so we have here on the y-axis the delivery time, on in gray boxes, which are the 4 passes through to the gateway. And obviously, traffic is always delivered within this time frame because all traffic is going to the gateway, to the ground station. And we can see that for traffic load of 0.3, CGR already needs to deliver the data in the third pass, the pass number 3. When actually for that same amount of data, that other like LPA or GPA are actually delivering the same load at the second pass because they're actually making a better use of the overall network resources. And this is a detailed view of what's actually happening here on between CGR and GPA. And we can take a look here, a close look. What is the overall traffic flow that ends up happening in one and the other? So, if we see on the CGR on the top, we see that node 3 and 2 actually believes that the best way of getting to the ground station, which in this case is N0, is through N1, which is what CGR typically tends to calculate in this type of topologies. But what they don't really realize is that also N2 and N1 also have data to N0. And they don't realize it because there is no way for them to know this in advance. And therefore they end up congesting node 1, which is only able to deliver between a little bit more of 600 units of volume, as in this example, in the first contact, and 100 in the remaining contact. And the data is stacked in node 1, waiting for other passes to the ground station. And there are many wasted resources, as we can see here in gray lines. Resources which are intelligently used by a centralized partial traffic control of GPA, and therefore which can be informed to the node 3 in this case, that actually will have a contact plan that says, hey, node 3, the way for you to use resources in this network is to use your contact to node 4, and then through this contact you will be able to reach the gateway or the ground station at moment K8 or moment K16. And therefore I will be, if you take a look at this GPA overall behavior, is that we end up using fully the 4 opportunities of data download to the gateway, to the ground station, and therefore minimizing or practically completely reducing the problem of congestion in delay-tolerant networks. So we've seen that in internet the flow and congestion control are clearly separated, and this is traditionally studied and in the community in this way, and that but we've seen that in DTN these two phenomena kind of conflict each other, and it's not so clear the difference. And we claimed and argued that they cannot be isolated from routing anymore. So routing plays a key, an important decision on how to mitigate congestion in DTN. And when we move particularly to space-terrestrial networks, we can see that available information can be leveraged. We've seen that platforms, dynamic, orbital dynamics, and control can be played with and actually deriving quite smart congestion avoidance measures that facilitates the implementation of future space-terrestrial networks. So this is all, and please feel free to drop me a message or a question, and I will leave a reference to the paper where we'll discuss this in more detail, or just write me if you're interested, and I'll be happy to forward this. So thank you very much for listening.